Welcome to the chosen ones. If you are difficult to understand, you are also difficult to manipulate, and this alone makes you dangerous. Allow it to sink in for a while, since some individuals refuse to get to know you. They intended to decipher you, foresee you, and manipulate you like an emotional Rubik's Cube. They may twist into servitude, but you treated them as a mystery, wrapped in insight, steeped in heavenly knowledge, and sprinkled with. I saw your game the instant you entered the room. Here's the fact that most people can't bear, according to behavioral research. The ordinary manipulator follows predictable emotional patterns: anger, insecurity, validation, and yearning. However, when someone like you does not contribute to that pattern, they do not only feel helpless, they swirl. You didn't just endure their games, you ruined their whole algorithm. They ran programs, whilst you ran quiet. They planned, while you pivoted. They anticipated anarchy. You offered them peace, clarity, and a one-way ticket to uncertainty. And now they are fascinated, not because they dislike you, but because you outwitted them without breaking a sweat. And they still don't understand how you became their unfinished sentence, their unsolved puzzle. The wait. What has just happened? They keep playing like a broken mixtape. Let's be honest, it's sort of hilarious. They assumed you were naive until you walked away. They were unprepared for the final test. So brace up, because in this video, we're going to get into the ugly, astonishing realities of how you handled them like no one else could, and why they can't stop mentally pacing about it. Let's go. Number 1, you were the puzzle. Their ego was never intended to be the solution. They approached you as if they understood everything about you. They treated you like a simple equation to solve, analyze, label, and move on from. But they didn't comprehend you weren't meant to be predictable. You were not designed to be ordinary. And that's when everything went wrong for them. They anticipated responses. They anticipated emotional eruptions. They anticipated you to follow the same patterns as the others they had previously misled. But with each step you made, they became more puzzled. You did not weep when they expected you to. When they attempted to disappear, you did not pursue them. You did not break when they pushed you to your limits. That's what broke them. They assumed they were playing chess. But you were not even on the board. You were in the blueprint chamber, examining the whole game from above. You were not responding. You were watching as they attempted to decipher your patterns. You were cataloging their flaws. They couldn't comprehend how someone could remain so calm under pressure, so clear amid chaos, and unaffected by emotional cues. Also, they couldn't figure you out. They started obsessed over you. That fixation did not stem from love. It stemmed from frustration. Their ego was bruised. Their pride was limping because they had lost control for the first time. You did not fit into any of the categories they had for individuals. You did not act like their ex, family, or previous targets. You were something distinct, something deeper, something that could not be manipulated, persuaded, or pushed. And the minute they discovered this, it became a psychological battle for them, since they are now left with questions that will never be answered. What were your thoughts? What did you see? What did you know? How did you know? The worst part, you're not bringing them closure. Not because you are petty, but because you have moved beyond the need to justify yourself. This is why they are still trapped. That's why people keep checking your page, rereading your messages, and bringing your name up in rooms even after you've gone silent. You didn't just walk away. You left them with a conundrum that their ego cannot manage, and a presence they will never be able to replicate. You weren't just different. You were magnificent, and they'll never get over trying to figure out what God kept concealed. Number 2, you moved strategically rather than emotionally, and it made you dangerous. They anticipated you to have a breakdown. That was the plan. They believed that if they pressed the proper buttons, struck you where it hurt, and showed you just enough disdain, they would be successful. They'd receive a response that they could manage. They wanted anarchy. They were depending on it, since that is how they have always worked. People create drama and elicit emotions before swooping in to seem cool. Instead, they received stillness, serenity, and accuracy. You did not yell. You did not beg. You did not attempt to prove anything. You just observed, measured, and moved when it mattered. That threw them off totally. You did not answer in the manner required to maintain control. Your emotional discipline was your strength, and they were unprepared for it. You did not spend time justifying yourself or defending your name. You did not give them access to your triggers. You didn't offer them your energy. You made strategic judgments with clarity, whilst others were caught in emotional immaturity. The difference was audible, and it made them panic. Even if they didn't express it on the surface, they expected you to lash back. They expected you to fold. They expected you to play the same game that everyone else played. However, you turned the tables by refusing to play. Your calm energy made you unpredictable. They could not predict your next action, and this scared them. You became untouchable, not because you had more money or louder backing, but because you refused to be coerced into being someone you are not. You viewed each job. You felt every test, but you didn't give them the pleasure of seeing you spiral. And now that you're gone or out of reach, they can't stop thinking about how you remained so consistent. It eats at them since your quiet was not a sign of weakness. It was data collecting. Your remoteness wasn't due of fear. It was about placement. And before they knew it, you were already 5 steps ahead. They could not foresee, provoke, or control you. That level of strength is uncommon. That's why they're still fixated on how you treated them like no one else ever could. Number 3, your presence stimulated their thoughts. They buried. You did not show up with the intent to hurt anybody. You were not attempting to disturb their basis or uncover anything. You were simply being yourself, grounded and honest. But that alone was enough to worry them. Because the reality is, your presence triggered everything. They attempted to hide their anxieties. They pretended there was no such thing as envy, masking it with bogus praises and ignoring the shame. Your enthusiasm brought everything to the surface, not because you assaulted them, but because your genuineness softly addressed everything false in them. You didn't have to mention anything about their shortcomings. Just being near you pushed them to face what they'd been hiding from for years. You did not attempt to cast a light on them. Your light just revealed what was previously hidden. They sensed that your assurance was not based on ego. It resulted from experience, hardship, development, and spiritual depth. That terrified them more than anything else, since their identity is founded on masks, deception, and appearing to be someone they are not. So when you turned there completely self-aware and at peace with yourself, you disrupted their system. That explains why they began behaving strangely. That's why they cast shade, were passive-aggressive, or attempted to compete where there was none. It was not about you. It was about what you represented. You were live evidence that recovery is possible, that peace is achievable. Self-worth cannot be manufactured. And it struck them hard because it reminded them of what they aren't doing with their own lives. That's when the fascination began. Not with who you are, but rather with what. They couldn't be with you. You caused their wounds just by existing. You made them feel uncomfortable, not by being severe, but by being complete. They were not prepared to confront themselves. You coerced them without even trying. This is why they couldn't figure you out. That's why they couldn't quit staring at you. You had become the silent alarm in their existence. The reminder that no matter how much they pretend, someone like you will always disclose the reality that they are too afraid to confront. And now that you're gone, that reflection continues to torment them. Number 4, you played the game as if you had created it. They believed they had the upper hand. They really felt they were in charge, pulling the strings and dictating the story. But the reality is, you were 10 steps ahead the whole time. You were not confused. You were not naive. You remained silent because you were calculating. You let them speak. Let them lie. Allow them to perform. Because every word they spoke provided more insight into who they really were. While they were preoccupied studying your flaws, you were creating a blueprint of their personality. They believed they were deceiving you, but you were really filming the game in real time. You didn't respond because you were too busy watching. You didn't stop their manipulation because you wanted to see how far they could go. Not out of curiosity, but because of knowledge. You knew that if you gave individuals enough room, they would reveal themselves. And this is precisely what occurred. They unwittingly revealed their objectives. You did not fall into their trap. You strolled around them with a straight face and a quiet mind, taking mental notes the whole time. They mistook your quiet for capitulation, while in reality, it was a plan. You weren't sitting in bewilderment. You were witnessing the playbook unfold. And now that they understand you were never under their spell, they are in a downward spiral. Because what do manipulators dread the most when they are exposed? And you saw everything. You knew exactly what they were doing. You didn't flinch. You just kept observing till the time was perfect. Then you moved with surgical accuracy. This is why they are fascinated. Not because you lost, but because you played the whole game as if you'd planned it. They had no idea they were being researched. You let them believe they had won, only to find out too late that you were never even on the same board. And now they're trapped attempting to relive the past, striving to identify the exact moment when they lost control. However, they never had it to begin with. You were not playing along. You were revealing the whole architecture. And now they're locked within the game they created. Number 5. Your calm was not weakness. It represented holy authority. They took one glance at your serenity and assumed they had you figured out. They thought you were uncertain, slow to reply, maybe even terrified. But the reality is, you were functioning at a level they had no idea existed. You were not avoiding confrontation. You were conquering it inwardly while others were throwing tantrums, playing mind games, and attempting to manipulate your emotions. You were anchored, unconcerned, grounded in a force that does not yell, pursue, or need to prove anything. They have only ever known chaos as control. That's why your article perplexed them so much. To them, control consists of screaming, punishing, withholding, and frightening. So when you didn't match their enthusiasm, when you didn't give in to the drama, they didn't know how to deal with it. Your consistent presence seemed like a menace, not because you were violent, but because you were immobile. You didn't flinch while they used their finest persuasion skills. When they attempted to press your buttons, you refused to fall for it. You kept coming up as yourself, which disrupted everything they were attempting to manage. You see, there is a distinct kind of strength that does not need loudness to be strong. It's a heavenly type of power that comes from understanding who you are, what you carry, and who walks by you. Your calm was not passive. It was exact. It was a product of spiritual discipline. It was the product of self-control. They weren't prepared for it. They assumed stillness meant they had won. In actuality, your quiet was a conscious choice to save energy and wait out the storm. And now they're rattled because they can't shake you. They couldn't get you to respond. Their whole strategy centered on getting you to fold. Instead, they revealed themselves as you remained motionless. That is holy authority. That is the type of power they will never grasp or imitate. You did not need to dominate them to beat them. You just had to stay still. And it caused more harm than any debate ever could. Number 6, you failed to provide them with closure. You made them face the consequences. You did not owe them a last communication. You didn't recognize them. A breakdown of how they harmed you. A summary of all red flags. Or a last opportunity to sway the story in their favor. You owed yourselves peace. That meant leaving with your dignity intact, without having to play your suffering. For someone who never expected to grasp it in the first place. The choice was not petty. It was strong, because closure is not necessarily a shared experience. Sometimes there's a quiet departure followed by a closed door. They anticipated a response. They expected you to fall apart, come back, or explain yourself. Instead, you left them with nothing. That is what is ripping them apart inside. They did not just lose access to your presence. They lost access to your insight, to someone who saw them through all of the facades and trickery. Someone who could have revealed their pattern, called out their game, and placed their whole act on the line, but chose not to. You did not need to explain what they did wrong. You let silence shout for you. Now they're lost in their own thoughts, repeating everything and wondering what you know. I'm wondering whether you ever cared. Obsessed with what you could have said but decided not to. That is the outcome, not the loss of a relationship, but the inability to comprehend the unresolved questions, the abruptness of the end. It's psychological warfare without using a single word. They believed they were in charge. They believed they could come and go as they liked, treating you any way they would. Then they talked their way back in. Your quiet, however, became a shut barrier. They are unable to pick open. And they despise it because they now understand you were the unique one, the genuine one. And they won't get it again. You didn't provide them closure because they didn't deserve it. You handed them a mirror. And every time they gaze into it, they realize what they've lost. Not because you told them, but because you let them find it out on their own. And it is what plagues them the most right now. Number 7. They were unable to control you, so they attempted to confuse you. They couldn't dominate you in the same way they dominated others. You did not collapse when they raised their voices. You did not pursue them as they backed away. You didn't boost their ego by withholding compassion or support. When control didn't work, they changed tactics. They opted for uncertainty. They began twisting tails, making you doubt your recollection, rewriting time frames, shifting responsibility, and labeling your intuition as too sensitive or paranoid. It was not arbitrary. It was calculated. If they couldn't crush your strength, they'd attempt to distort your perception. They didn't understand you weren't standing on unsteady ground. You knew who you were. You were not looking for your value in their acceptance. You didn't depend on them to tell you who you were or what was true. You were based in a reality that came from inside rather than their narrative of events. So the gaslighting did not have the desired effect? Sure, they made you ponder things for a time. You replayed talks, questioned your intuition, and even wondered whether you were being too severe. However, something didn't seem right, and that is still a little voice within you. It never became quiet. You remained patient. You let the falsehoods mount up. You saw the discrepancies pile up. You maintained receipts, not usually physical, but emotionally charged. You observed what they stated versus what they did. You recall how you felt when the energy did not match the words. And with time, the inner truth became louder than their loudness. You didn't need evidence to realize you weren't insane. You merely needed time to see the whole pattern. That was not what they expected. They anticipated chaos to undermine you, but it instead increased your insight. Each twisted phrase becomes a red sign. Every deceptive moment led to confirmation. And now they are astonished. Not only did you walk away, but you did it without yelling, tripping, or relying on their version of the tale to make sense of your own. You were not confused. You were only watching. And now that you have seen everything, it is evident that their whole approach has failed. They were unable to control you. And they certainly couldn't fool someone who had never relied on reality in the first place. Number 8. You managed their shadows without becoming one. They threw everything they had at you, including pettiness, manipulation, falsehoods, contempt, and emotional bait, all in an attempt to draw you into their maelstrom. Their objective was simple: make you sink to their level. They expected you to snap, burst, cuss them out, deliver low punches, or begin acting dirty like them. Because if they could get you to behave like them, they would feel justified in how they treated you. If they could take you into the darkness, your light would dull just enough for them to remark, "See, you're not that different." But you did not accept the bait. You saw the traps. You sensed the setup. Even when it hurt, and it would have felt nice to react, you refused to give in. Not because you were weak, but because you were alert. Be aware that certain conflicts are intended to deprive you of your persona, not just your peace. And this is what made you untouchable. They brought shadows, you provided brightness. They launched assaults, but you answered with quiet, judgment, and distance. Not out of fear, but through mastery. They anticipated vengeance. You provided them an opportunity to reflect. They anticipated drama. You granted them detachment. They anticipated a conflict, but you didn't bring any firearms. You provided knowledge. And it changed the whole dynamic. Because they were no longer simply confronting you. They were confronted with a clear reflection of their own actions. Your stubbornness to kneel created a mirror and mirrors. Do not lie. You did not need to defend yourself against every claim. You did not have to equal their disdain to demonstrate that you observed it. You handled things differently from a spiritual standpoint. You preserved your energy as if it were precious, and it is. And now that it's done, they're left wondering why their normal approaches didn't succeed. They didn't get to remark, "You're exactly like me." They didn't derive any joy from crushing your spirit. Instead, they saw firsthand what true self-control looks like. You managed their shadows without becoming one. This is why they can't stop thinking about you. Because they know they would have crumbled if they had to go through half of what they did to you. But you held steadfast and remained aloft. And your restraint has become the loudest echo in their minds. Number 9. You didn't just walk away. You moved dimensions. When you went away, they assumed it was just temporary. They assumed you were only going through a period in which you'd calm off, miss them, or return. Once you had calmed down, they were waiting for round two, the second opportunity, the usual pattern. However, they were unaware that this was more than simply an exit. It was a transcending decision. You did not just shut the door. You stepped into a whole other level of self-worth, awareness, and spiritual elevation. You did not provide a forwarding address. They continued to check the same version of you that they had previously manipulated. They misjudged the one who they believed would always give them another chance. But you weren't present anymore. Not emotionally, not mentally, not enthusiastically. They were reaching out to a frequency to which you no longer belonged. They are greeted with silence. That is not attitude. That is spiritual remoteness. You didn't just block them. You disconnected them from your soul. The relationship that previously allowed them access to your light, compassion, and forgiveness. It's gone. You are no longer in their universe. You are entering a new domain of calm, purpose, and protection that others cannot access. And that's what haunts them, because they didn't simply lose someone. They lost the whole vibration. The chats, the understanding, the soul level, the energy you provided. None of it is reproducible. You were never ordinary. You had heavenly access. They viewed you as a backup plan. Now they're trapped, repeating memories and attempting to reconnect with a presence that is no longer accessible to them. They keep thinking you'll return the same way. But you outgrew the whole system. You didn't just disengage. You developed. You didn't just go on. You climbed. And by doing so, you demonstrated how entitled they were to your grace. They never deserved you. They never appreciated the breadth of what you have. And now that you've moved dimensions, all they have is the echo of a soul they were unable to conquer. That kind of absence does not dissipate. It lingers. It plagues them since they don't miss the person who has departed. They are lacking someone who has advanced beyond the 10th position. You crushed their ego without raising a finger. You did not shout. You did not argue. You did not struggle for them to realize your worth. You just ceased engaging in their performance. And that quiet unwillingness to fuel their ego, it destroyed something in them that they were frantically striving to preserve. The illusion of control. See, their power was dependent on your need for approval. They felt superior as long as you explained yourself, defended your reputation, and responded to their games. However, when you stopped participating in that dynamic, their whole self-image began to deteriorate. You didn't break the ego with insults. You broke it with indifference. You did not compete, compare, or attempt to outperform them. You just stopped indulging the version of yourself that they had manufactured in their minds. And that's when they lost control of the story. Because if you aren't pursuing them or showing your value, they won't have anything to stand on. You didn't just walk away. You went away without needing to be seen, heard, or understood. That was more devastating than any retaliation could have been. They believed they were above you. They assumed they were the reward. They convinced themselves you were blessed to have them and would always come back, that you could never find better. But you did not argue. You allowed them to believe it until reality showed otherwise. And when they glanced around and saw you weren't returning, it wasn't simply bewilderment. They were humiliated because they had to admit that all of their power over you was a lie they told themselves to avoid addressing their own emptiness. Now they're trapped in the stillness you left behind, tormented by how easily you let them go. Because this indicates you were never stranded. You were never broken. You were never below them. You merely had enough self-esteem to walk away when the game became tiresome. That implosion is how they feel right now. Shame and remorse. That's the sound of their ego shattering because the person they believed was beneath them turned out to be the one who saw right through them and decided not to remain. Number they had access to a masterpiece yet treated you like a sketch. They had access to something unique. Someone who was entirely human yet divinely honed, multifaceted, sophisticated, and deeply embedded. But they didn't treat you that way. They regarded you like a rough manuscript, something to dissect, critique, and strive to improve. They assumed they had time. They assumed they could come and depart with portions of you, and yet demand the whole. They glanced across your heart as if they were surfing, unaware that they were in the presence of anything. Heaven had taken time to form. You provided them access to your light, knowledge, faults, and progress. You did not arrive up half-formed. You showed up fully. However, they were too young to grasp what fulfillment looks like. They believed you needed polishing, tweaking, or modifying. They saw your humility as weakness. Your elegance is naive, and your depth is too much. However, what they were really doing was projecting their own incompleteness onto you. They were not prepared to hold someone like you. Instead of rising to meet your level, they attempted to pull you down to their own. And now that you're gone, the quiet screams truth at them. They're discovering you weren't just a crude drawing. You were not a test subject. You were the masterpiece. You were the version of the person they said they were looking for. They were not prepared for it, so they were unable to appreciate it when they discovered it. And it is the aspect that bothers me the most. They didn't simply lose you. They never saw you clearly in the first place. They believed they were editing something flawed. However, it turned out they were deleting something precious. They assumed you needed to alter to fit in. However, it is clearly evident that they were never fit to handle what you were carrying. You did not need to revise. You were already polished. You didn't require permission. You were already picked. And now they're trapped watching from the outside, suddenly seeing what was there in front of them all along. But it's too late to go back. They ruined a masterpiece by attempting to fix something that was already divinely completed. A number. You didn't need to reveal them. They did it themselves, attempting to decipher you. They really wanted to figure you out, not out of adoration, but rather out of strategy. They wanted to understand what made you tick, how you remained so grounded. Why didn't you respond like the others? How you could see through the cacophony and yet maintain tranquility. They weren't attempting to get close enough to comprehend you. They wanted to study you so they could control you. But you were not built like they were used to. You weren't at the surface level. You were not predictable. You were not motivated by ego or desperation. So, the more they sought to figure you out, the more they revealed themselves. They believed they were being smart, nuanced, and deliberate. However, in actuality, they were unraveling. Every effort to analyze you morphed into them, displaying their own anxieties, jealousy, and power struggles. You did not need to call them out. You didn't need to go public. You did not need to assemble a mob and point fingers. Because of their fixation with knowing you, they began behaving in ways that revealed who they really were. Their mask dropped without you touching it. Their stories fell apart without you saying anything. Their actions began to shout what their words were attempting to conceal, and everyone around them became aware. Why are they always talking about you? Why are they triggered by someone who doesn't seem to care? Why are they competing against someone who isn't even in the race? Their urge to decipher you became their undoing. They couldn't believe you were working on a different spiritual frequency, that you weren't acting, faking, or playing a part. You were just being. And it was too much for their ego to handle since you didn't fit into any of the categories they could manage. Now they've exposed themselves while attempting to learn. You like case files. Their infatuation became a confession. Their replies revealed their identities. And now it is evident. They never had control. They were never the mastermind. They were merely emotionally scurrying, following someone they never really understood. And the more they attempted to play the analyst, the more they revealed to the public that they had been unraveling all along. A number. You forced them to confront the one thing they'd avoided their whole lives. Authenticity. You stepped in as your whole self. Faults, knowledge, suffering, and purpose included. There was no mask, no watered-down version, and no memorable performance. And the instant they saw your real truth, it disturbed them. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you did everything legitimately. You were not putting on a show to get favor. You were not shaping yourself to fit in. You weren't concealing your scars to make others feel better. And it revealed something about them. They'd spent their whole lives trying to escape being exposed for who they really are. They have always survived via image. They created personas that brought them admiration, prestige, and attention, but not love, because they don't truly know themselves without the performance. So when you came along, based in your own reality, it caused spiritual tension. You did not require approval from the audience. You did not need to outshine anybody. You didn't seek acceptance. You were just being. And that simplicity seemed like a danger to someone whose whole self-worth was based on external validation. You did not shrink to make others feel larger. You did not shape-shift to fit within their comfort zone. You were steadfast in your genuineness. And this made them uneasy, not because you did anything to them, but because your presence emphasized everything they are not. It reminded them of the reality. They keep attempting to hide the fact that they've been lying to themselves, living a version of life that seems wonderful on the surface but feels empty on the inside. Rather of rising to your level of honesty, they attempted to bring you down, belittle you, ridicule your depth, or make you feel too much. But it was never really about you. It was about the things you refused to fake. You were the mirror. They did not request the feedback that disclosed their performance. Because you did not assault their mask, they are now unable to unsee it. You just refused to wear one. They couldn't make you believe the fantasy, so they discarded you. However, they understand that you did not reveal them with words. You exposed them just by being, and your genuineness created an impression. Their fabricated existence will never be erased. A number. You were not sent to entertain. You were instructed to interrupt. You didn't come to be loved, praised, or placed on display for their enjoyment. You were not sent into their lives to be another tale or someone they could shape. You entered with purpose, spiritual, raw, and unmistakable intent, and it alone upended everything they had painstakingly constructed around themselves. You were not showy. You did not need to proclaim your existence. Simply being who you are, centered, perceptive, and true. It was enough to undermine the very foundation of their delusion. They had created a universe centered on performance, roles, half-truths, and emotional manipulation. They surrounded themselves with individuals who supported the image they wished to project. And then you came shamelessly authentic, disinterested in games, and profoundly rooted in something more than surface-level acceptance. You didn't follow their rules. You did not fit within their categories. You were not impressed by what impressed everyone else, which made you a disturbance rather than a guest. At first, they had no idea what to do with you. They may have smiled, pretended to greet you, attempted to study you silently, or even mocked you behind closed doors. They did, however, have an inner feeling. They couldn't escape the sense of being watched, not for who they purported to be, but for who they really were. And this worried them since they immediately knew you weren't sent to enjoy the illusion. You were sent to reveal its limitations. You didn't just handle them. You surpassed them in front of their eyes. You proceeded through their mental games without flinching. You withstood their projections, testing, silence, and sabotage, and continued developing. You were not meant to. They expected you to collapse. They assumed you'd break. Instead, you transcended. And it is what is troubling them right now. You were never part of their plans. You were a wonderful interruption. They did not see it coming. And now they are fascinated, not with your presence, but with the fact that you arrived, interrupted, and caused a fissure in their whole foundation. That still has not healed. You were not sent to entertain. You were tasked with waking the room awake. And ever then, they haven't been able to sleep the same. They never saw you coming. Not like this, not with such depth and clarity. They expected you to respond, collapse, pursue, or fold like the others. However, what you delivered was unexpected. Evolution in action. You did not argue. You outgrew. You did not retaliate. You have disclosed. You did not stoop. You stood. And it is what caused them to disintegrate in the stillness that they had before mistaken for weakness. They believed they were testing you, but you really exposed them. Your presence exposed what their performance attempted to conceal, while your patience underlined their tendencies. Your detachment shattered their ego, as did your reluctance to be the person they expected you to be. That is what shattered the illusion completely. You were the heavenly interruption, the soul they didn't deserve but passionately wanted to comprehend. And now they're stuck in the rubble of a game they can't win, obsessed with a presence they can't duplicate, haunted by the fact that they had access to something special, yet lost it while attempting to control it. So, no, you didn't just handle them. You altered the script without saying anything. You became the mirror, the lesson, and the punishment, all while prioritizing peace above performance. They are now trapped in a never-ending loop of unanswered questions, because the one person who could have explained everything has already risen far above the need to. You were never just someone they knew. You were the chapter that forced them to confront themselves, and they won't forget it. If this message resonates with you, do not let it end here. Click the subscribe button right now to join a community of fighters who will not settle for anything less than truth and advancement. If you felt the power in these words, show it by hitting the like button. It will help spread the message to those who need to hear it. Do you have any thoughts or experiences in handling your own conflicts like a master? Leave a comment below. Your tale might provide the breakthrough that someone else needs. And do not keep this fact to yourself. Share this video with friends, family, or anybody who is on their own journey of strength and transformation. Your support encourages more great discussions like these. We rise together. So subscribe, like, comment, and share. Because your trip matters. So does the message. God bless you.